When I went in the hospital when my younger son was paralyzed, I knew the future. I knew what the steps were. I knew what's going to happen. What I didn't know was the emotional roller coaster that you go on when that happens, that our clients are on, that our families that we represent experience. And that was the most telling for me because it gave me even a greater understanding of what the lives are with our clients.
Howdy, and welcome to the show. Cooper's Code focuses on legal issues and notable practitioners, distilling wisdom so we all achieve the best results for our clients. I'm Miles Cooper, and we've got a wonderful conversation ahead of us today, part 2 with legend Thomas J. Brandi. As we navigate through some of the casework that you've done, I know one case that is going to stand out in people's minds in terms of recent memory and is the Ghost Ship fire. People, I'm sure, read about it on the news, and I know it was quite a challenging case to deal with. Is that one that we can go into?
Yeah, I think so. We were part of a team. My office and Roger Dreyer's office with Bob Bale and Brian Malloy from my office did the public entity part of the case, which is public record. Others did the other defendants part of the case. I won't even say who they are because I'm not sure what I can or can't say.
Right.
And then Bob and I did the negotiations with Mike Ornstill as a mediator. There was several challenges there. When you have a public entity case and they just back up a truck and they say, look at all the immunities we have.
Right.
Okay. So we had to ferret our way through this minefield. But what it came down to was they had people that were firemen and policemen that knew there were problems in that building. There were firemen who had been inside the building. There was a fire officer who had been inside the building for a party. And nobody said a word. And they're supposed to go out and inspect the properties. And that was one of the ones that no one had ever inspected. And, I think jurors, no matter their background, expect that people do their jobs. And if you don't do your job and somebody's injured or seriously, you should be held accountable. I think that's a fundamental premise that everybody agrees to, whether they're whatever their political leanings are. And that was a case where they didn't do their job and people died.
In that case, from a negotiating structure perspective, did you end up having to contend with summary judgment before you could have a meaningful conversation? Or where along the arc of things were you?
We had 3 battles on pleadings for immunity, a JNOV. They took us to the Court of Appeal twice. We had 7 major motions that would have resulted in our dismissal, either at the trial or appellate level, and we won every one of them. Brian Malloy just did an extraordinary job on that. He's just brilliant. That was a difficult case and difficult challenge. People said, well, the city doesn't have any money and defendant X doesn't have any money. And, they did. So we're going to help those families who, for the most part, lost a child. An adult child, 19, 20, 22, 23, etc. People that never got a chance to get started in life.
In another area of making an impact, I want to talk about the Bank of America verdict. It's a completely different kind of a case.
Yeah. Jim Sturdivant was handling this case against Bank of America, and Jim is just a really terrific class action lawyer. And his wife is Therese Lawless, and who's a wonderful plaintiff's employment lawyer. And she had recommended to Jim that he might consider having someone with more of a trial bent try the case, and Jim asked me to try the case. And so I read all the depositions and all the stuff and all the motions, and it was all about banking and regulations and what have you. So there was a group of people in our society who get SSI, and there are seniors, and many of them, mental acuity is not what it is in others. And sometimes they would run into situations where they ran out of money, wrote a check, overdraft, etc. Social Security is deposited the first of every month. So if John Smith stiffs a check, and there's a charge, John Smith may not have any more money in that bank. But if Social Security comes in every month, you're getting that money. So somebody's getting, say, $800 or $900 a month, and they bounced 3 or 4 checks. They were charging $32 a check. So somebody thinks they've got $800 to spend when in fact, because of the overdraft charges from prior months or what have you, they only had $500. And so then they were in this cycle. And so we felt that they were improperly charging too much money. And there was a case at the time, Kruger, that we were relying on. So we picked a jury. I gave opening statement. And I remember this vividly because we started at 8:30. We finished jury selection at 9. I opened, they opened, and I put on 3 witnesses under 776. And I didn't ask them any of the questions they were asked in their depositions. And Jim says to me, "This is a case about bank regulations." I said, "No, it's not." He says, "You're not trying the case I prepared." I said, "That's right." He said, "Well, what's this case about then?" I said, "It's about lying and cheating." And that's the case we tried. Because it was. It was about cheating a bunch of people that didn't have the ability to see anything. It was just great opportunity. It's unfortunate that the Supreme Court took it away.
I am aware of that, but taking it away or not, I don't know that there are that many lawyers out there who can put a $1 billion verdict on their list of accomplishments.
Well, Quentin Kopp, who was a longtime San Francisco state senator and judge, he said to me one time, he says, "I read the decision. Did you get screwed? Too much money."
In a case like that, a lot of us see the same, whether they're in-house for insurance companies or outhouse firms on the injury side. We oftentimes see the same types of lawyers. Who does Bank of America bring in for a case like that?
They had a couple big firm lawyers. You know, Miles, that there's a lot of really good lawyers who don't have the credentials that some people do who are on big firm litigation teams. And oftentimes the big firm litigation team might have tried 5 trials, whereas somebody else has tried quite a few more. I'll leave it at that.
As we parse some of the issues that we work through as lawyers, have you had occasion to come across defendants where, or witnesses where something awful has happened, and in taking their deposition or seeing how they present, you've become aware that they truly believe what they are saying, and it doesn't jive with the evidence? They've created, in essence, a construct to address the awfulness of what has occurred.
I've seen that twice, at least, on a horrible scale. One was Evan Prothero Jr., who was the bus driver, and another was a mechanic for, there was a J-hook, an aircraft PSA coming out of Mexico to the Bay Area, and it crashed. And the NTSB report showed that there was a failure of a part called a J-hook. And then you looked historically into what happened, and that particular plane, one of the mechanics had said, "This thing needs to be taken out of service." And the bosses didn't want to do it. And the mechanic that did it was like the head of the union, the local chapter, and very active. They said in union matters, he said in safety matters. If you ever talk to mechanic for United or any of them, every one of them will tell you it's all about safety. And this guy was that way. And so they waited till the shift ended and they got somebody else who wasn't so involved with the union, but was a lot more pro-management, although a member of the union. And he said, no, it's okay. And it stayed in service for a while, beyond when it should have. They had numerous opportunities to take it out. They didn't. And this plane crashed. And all these people were killed. And when we took his deposition, it was the same as the bus driver in the Yuba City bus crash case. They even looked alike. Their mannerisms were the same. But the way I read them was that they had come up with a version of the incident that had them blameless. Because otherwise, how could they account for the fact that their conduct led to so many lives being lost?
As you're dealing with that puzzle piece in the jigsaw of a case, what do you do with that piece? How do you, whether you use it to your advantage or address it or diffuse it? There is a difference when somebody truly believes what they're saying in terms of how they present.
Yeah, that's a good point. As a young lawyer, I wanted to make sure the jury understood what I was saying. So I said it 200 more times than necessary. And you evolve to a point where you put the dots out there and you give them an opportunity to connect. And the leaders in the jury will do the connection and the persuasion within the room because, final arguments, giving the arguments to those people to persuade the other people so that they could hear it from each other as opposed to necessarily from you. And so I think you have to put out the facts and so that the people can see that for whatever reason this guy's wrong. And then the juror gets to figure out for themselves, why does he feel that way? And pretty soon somebody's going to say, it's the only way he can live with himself. It's not that he's dishonest. It's he's doing it for survival. So they will maybe blame him for the conduct, but not punish him.
As I'm going through and pulling out different pieces that I want to make sure I ask you in our conversation, another thing I remember from a long time ago was a seminar that you gave where you touched on certain things to make sure that you were at your best for your practice and trial. And you talked about how you wanted to make sure that you knew your opposition really, really well. You understood how they ticked. And the other thing that you dropped in is almost a throwaway line, and I remember it because I was a drinker back when I heard it, was that, and I don't drink. And that's kind of a springboard to follow up a little bit on those issues. How do you get to know your opposing counsel? What tools do you use as far as that's concerned? And do you drink?
Oh, I don't drink. It's not because of any particular event or reason or anything like that. I never was one that would much of a drinker. I didn't like hard alcohol in college and didn't do that and stopped drinking beer. I thought it bloated me. And we drank wine. Actually, my wife and I have some vines on our property in Hillsburg and make wine. And people say, you make wine, but you don't drink. It's something I haven't had for, over 3 decades. But what I was mentioning by that was I believe you've got to be at the absolute top of your game, physically, mentally. I saw as a young lawyer how many people destroyed themselves with alcohol or cocaine or gambling or going outside their marriage. And for whatever reasons, I don't want to come across as a sheriff, the moral sheriff. It's just that I saw people destroying who they were and their opportunities. I had cases against lawyers that I knew weren't capable anymore of doing their best because they either physically lacked the stamina or mentally weren't as sharp at certain parts of the day. And there have been more than a few cases where in the olden days, we were in depositions with each other and we were in court with each other and we went to lunch with each other. And you saw how people handled different social situations. I've tried cases with people who I checked what their body rhythm was. Were they sharper in the morning and the afternoon? for example, if we really hit them hard in the afternoon when they were tired with a big witness or a big cross, and you looked at them the next morning and they were a little baggy around the eyes because they'd had a few extra drinks. And so we watched the body rhythm, and I would literally put in a witness at different time during the day, depending upon what we had seen, were their strengths or weaknesses, and how they responded to things and how they responded to challenges.
Well, that's part of the dynamic nature of being in the moment in trial, adjusting to the circumstance that presents itself.
Yeah, it really is. But I don't know, I'm sure you've seen it. I mean, people would come in and they'd be a little bit hungover.
As we talk about being at the top of your game in terms of performance, does fitness fit in your life? I know you were an athlete in college. As you're maintaining that same kind of apogee of peak trial lawyer, are there things that you do to take care of yourself?
Yeah. Right now I've got an injured foot, but I do Peloton during the week, a minimum of 30 minutes. And then on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I do elliptical for 50 to 55 minutes. And I try to walk at least 2 miles each day on days that I take the Muni. I get off at Powell Street and I walk just about a mile in my office, and same thing going home. Gives me an opportunity in 15 minutes or so to kind of clear my head and see the world around me and defuse a little bit or get ready. And fitness is an absolutely essential part of my life.
One of the things I remember about visiting your office back in the day is a plaque noting the Honorary Council of Slovenia as well as the Brandi law firm.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and the role that
Sure.
you play there?
There's a Catholic church on Linden Street and fronts on Fell, Church of Nativity. It was the historic church of the Slovenian and Croatian communities. And my mother's family was from there. She was married there. And sometime in the late 90s, the Bishop of San Francisco issued an edict to close 9 churches. And my mother called and said, quote, "Tommy, I'm sending some ladies to see you. I promised them you'd get the church reopened." I said, "Okay, Mom." And so these ladies come in and they said, "The bishop's closing our church," and this and that. And so fine. And I met with the people in the community, and they were wonderful people. They had no political axe to grind. They weren't vocal. They just went to mass. That was it. That was their community. They went there every Sunday. So we filed an injunction, or we filed for an injunction. And just before I filed for injunction, I had written some letters for them to the bishop and asked them to reconsider what their stuff. Anyway, it was not going to happen. But I ended up in Rome arguing the appeal of the bishop's denial.
Was this
in the Vatican?
Okay. Is this canonical law?
Yeah, of which I know. You and I right now know the same amount.
Is there a Reddit group guide on that?
There's not even a guy you can call up. Okay.
How's your Latin?
My Latin. Let me tell you the story. So I get over there, and one of the people in the Slovenian community knew a guy in Slovenia who knew a bishop, who knew a cardinal, who knew the guy that was the ambassador to the Vatican from Slovenia. And they got this deal where I would get a hearing. So they said, "Go to the hotel and wait." So I waited. I got a call. They said, "Be at the Vatican at 1:00. And go to the Vatican, and they'd send me to an upstairs room, the Swiss Guard. And I walked in this room, and it was a hot July day. The windows are open, but the Vatican is so formal, the air was afraid to enter. Okay. All right. This priest comes in and, "Mr. Brandi, yes, how are you?" I said, and we're talking Italian, of which I could speak like a reasonable 4-year-old. And so I start my argument, and after about 5 minutes, he says, would you prefer to speak English? I said, oh, God, yeah. And so I gave him the whole pitch. He knew all the facts. And at the end, I'm thinking, I can't remember this guy's name. So I said, excuse me, Father, I've forgotten your name. And he says, that's okay. And I said, when I go back to the community in San Francisco, I want to tell them about how you gave us this time and you were very considerate and stuff. And so would you mind telling me your name? And there was this pause. And he said, under the local rules, I have the option of telling you or not. I've decided not to. So for any lawyers listening to this, they can remember the days when the local rules were the hidden rules that nobody knew except the clerk and 2 other people who weren't in the courtroom, but was it working against you? So I went to see from him this guy who was the ambassador from Slovenia to the Vatican. And he said, and he had a short sleeve white shirt on, and he had forearms bigger than Steve Garvey's. Now, Steve Garvey, not the Steve Garvey the same Steve Garvey that's running for senator, but for those of you who remember when he was with a Dodger, massive arms. And he said to me, you're going to lose. And in 18 months, you have appeal, and you'll lose that again. He says, and after that, there's only one person that can help you. That's the Pope. And then he pauses. He goes, there, I may be of assistance. And behind him were 2 pictures. One, the standard picture of the Pope was John Paul. And the other one was the Pope, John Paul, with this guy's head in a headlock, giving him what we called a noogie. Okay? So 18 months go, we lose. 18 months goes by, we lose. And in December, 4.5 years later, a letter comes from the Pope saying the church is reopened. I take my mother to Mass there on Christmas morning, and she turns to the ladies and said, see, I told you Tommy would help. And from that, the community presented me to the government, and they named me or asked me to be the counsel, and it's been a lot of fun.
It's a wonderful background story.
Yeah.
Switching gears a little bit, I know that within your family, you've experienced some challenges in terms of your sons. I know one son is paralyzed.
Correct.
And I know another just recently was
January of this year, January 26th, my oldest son, who's a fitness instructor in just an incredible condition, was hit by a bike. Was hospitalized for 26 days. Was in a coma for 6 and has a traumatic brain injury. In fact, I just got an email from him this morning as I was coming over here. And those are challenges. Obviously, walking into the hospital the last time, all I could remember was walking into the hospital with my first son and thinking, God, can you walk? And it was 5 days before I saw him move his legs. I've said this before. None of us are immune from life. Everything happens to us that happens to everyone else, you know. Cancer, illness, strokes, what have you, and we're all going to die. Although some of us, maybe myself included, think you want to live forever. Who knows? But it's those are those experiences. And we have those experiences with our clients. When I went in the hospital when my younger son was paralyzed, I knew the future. I knew what the steps were. I knew what's going to happen. We had a problem getting to a rehab center. I called Deborah Doherty and Carol Hyland, and they were magic, getting him into Santa Clara Valley. I was down in Santa Clara Valley, and I said, do you do A, B, and C? And they say, how do you know that? And I said, well, I've represented people that do that. And she said, no, we don't have the funding for that anymore. I said, oh, okay. What I didn't know was the emotional roller coaster that you go on when that happens, that our clients are on, that our families that we represent experience. And that was the most telling for me because it gave me even a greater understanding of what the lives are with our clients.
Do you feel like going through that experience has made you better at being able to communicate some of those challenges for your clients?
I can't tell you the number of clients that I've shared that with right away so that they know I know. I know when they're hurting. I know what that hurt feels like. I know what it's like. I know what it's like. You know, Miles, I tried a case with Rick Bennett, and it was Hutchinson versus the state of California, Highway 12 in Solano. And I was in the middle of final argument talking about this boy who was paralyzed and what his grandmother went through. His grandmother and mother were caring for him. Grandmother was sitting at the table with us. Rick has a son in a wheelchair. I had a son in a wheelchair. She had a grandson in a wheelchair. And I reached a point where I was talking about this, and all I could see was what my wife was doing for my son, my adult son. And I was going to make a deeper point, but I couldn't talk. And so I walked from where I was over to pick up an exhibit. I was in the damage phase of the argument. And then I slowly walked back to the table and I put it up. And I needed about 30 seconds because I, honest to God, couldn't talk.
Mm.
And I gave the rest of my argument. And my wife was there watching the final argument. And Betty Hutchinson and Rick both said to me after, "We know what happened." I said, "Yeah." And I don't know if anybody else sensed it, but it was, yeah. I mean, you can't. I would hope that it makes me a better lawyer, seeing the pain that my family has suffered, that I can be more sensitive and understanding my clients and better able to communicate it. Because we're all one people, you know?
I had heard the phrase emotional incontinence before in reading PTSD and other reports for some of my clients. I had no idea what it was until after we went through our challenges. And that would be what I would describe that moment in trial, where the emotions overcome you in a way that you are not in control. I mean, we're not really in control of our emotions, but we're supposed to be powerful storytellers. And sometimes that human element can trigger something.
You know, we were taught in law school, a great lawyer can argue both sides of the case. I tell my students, I'm not a great lawyer. I couldn't represent the tobacco companies that had cases against. I couldn't have represented A.H. Robbins. I couldn't represent some of these people that we've tried to hold accountable. That's just not in my makeup. And I think our ability to relate to our clients and understand their pain and communicate that pain is essential to a successful resolution for them. How many times have we seen just a cold-hearted person on the other side that could care less? It's just about numbers. It's not. It's about at the basic root of every single lawsuit is a human being and what happened to that person. And how does that affect that person and the rest of us? And I just hope that we can continue to focus on that.
As we talk about arguing both sides of things, that brings me to the idea of focus groups and the situation where sometimes we are asked in the old style focus group of, I'm arguing the plaintiff's case and I've asked my friend Tom to argue the defense case. Have you found yourself in situations where you've had to argue that, or do you usually have somebody else play the defense?
Well, I haven't done focus groups that way in forever.
Okay.
We do the focus group now more like they do market surveys and what have you, in the sense you give an idea and you see people's responses and you build a story that way and their reactions to ideas and things like that.
I describe those as unpeeling the onion.
Mm. I did remember doing that, and I remember channeling some defense lawyers' approaches to do it. I've never been comfortable with it. I firmly believe that a jury knows from the beginning if you're sincere or not. And if they think you're not sincere, they ain't going to listen to you. That to stand up for somebody and ask the jury to believe in your case, you better believe in it. And if you don't, then why should they? And to believe in it, you have to do your work. You have to get the right discovery, the right experts, put it together the best way you can, the best way to present the truth of that case in order to do the best job you can for your client. It's, to me, that simple. You know, Miles, you triggered something in my mind that I remembered. I tried a case, we called it the Hunters Point Fire. 4 children and their grandmother were killed in public housing. And we said they should have had a smoke alarm. It was a 2-story. And they didn't. They blamed the boyfriend of the grandmother, saying that he had been smoking and his cigarette lit the sofa on fire. So we bought the sister sofa, and you couldn't start a fire with a cigarette. You know, you damn near needed a blowtorch to do it. And we figured out that the problem that started the fire was in the wiring. So when we tried this case, and we presented this information, we went to a mediation and a settlement conference. And I'm not going to name any names for the reason why. The other side was the San Francisco Housing Authority, and they were represented by counsel. And they had a $1 million insurance policy that they didn't want to offer. And then on the eve of trial, they did with the words, "It's a lot of money for those kind of people."
Lovely.
I damn near had to be restrained. Okay. I almost lost my cool. We tried the case. We got a $15 million verdict. And the gentleman that was in charge of maintenance for the housing authority knew the deceased grandmother. And, you know, we beat him up pretty good on the stand for why didn't you do this and why didn't you do that. He waited after the verdict, and he came to the family and he said, "Your mother was a good woman. I enjoyed talking with her. I'm so sorry this happened. I'm so glad you got this verdict." And that was a different side of a reaction to see that. We talk about feelings. In 1992, just after we started our own firm, I had 3 cases in 1 year. There was no offers on any of them, and 2 million and $1 million and $1.7 million verdicts in the 3 of them. And it's sort of got us over a hump, so to speak. And one of them was a plane crash involving a glider. And the government of the United States had a program where they pick from all services 30 pilots to go from all the way up to test pilot school. And one of the guys who was picked was from Washington High School in San Francisco, married to a girl who went to Presentation High School. And he was a mechanic and self-taught and gotten tremendous story. Got in this program. They take off on a glider. It crashes. And we got the glider rope. We had the rope tested and it didn't meet the basic requirements. We sued for product defect. We took the deposition of the woman who was in charge of the rope tests, the book. They called the book the Bible. And she was a conservative Christian. You could see by her demeanor, what have you. I took this deposition, and the records I had, I was convinced the records had been altered. But I didn't have an original. All I was given was a copy, and the discovery judges said, "No, that's all you need. That's the records. They said it's truth," and what have you. So I put her on the stand, and I said, and I got her at 10 minutes to 4 on a Friday. I said, "Don't you look at this record? So these are the records of your organization, right? It's you call it the Bible, don't you?" "No, because the Bible's about the truth, isn't it?" She said, "Yes, the Bible's about the truth." I said, "Look at this record right here. That number's been changed, hasn't it?" And she dropped her eyes. And she said, I said, "That was a 0 and someone made it into an 8. And she looked at it and she couldn't talk. And I said, "Did you change it?" She said, "No." Which to me was an admission it had been changed. "Did you change it?" "No." "Who did?" She looks over beyond the defense counsel. She looks over here where the house counsel, the in-house counsel, was sitting. And she's looking in the back of the room like this. And I said, "Who changed it?" And she went, I don't know. And I said, "Was it the lawyers?" And they objected. And I struck the question. I said, who had it last? And she said, the lawyers. And then she said, oh, not them, meaning defense counsel. And the next week, I asked the judge to have the original there by Monday. We had it Monday. There's a guy named Lloyd Cunningham who was a question document examiner. We snuck him in the courtroom at lunchtime. He put some magic stuff on it, and we saw all the changes.
Wow.
And then we called Lloyd, and I said, Your Honor, I have an experiment I like to do. We put the lights up, put this stuff, did it, and all these numbers jumped out. What I had read, and I use these two people as an example, was they were at the core of a defense. And the housing authority had set up this maintenance guy sort of to blame everything on him when it wasn't really his fault. It was management for not having a smoke detector in there. And the other woman, she was very conscientious in her job. And she knew something was wrong. She wasn't going to volunteer it. But it was almost as if I think she hoped I could drag it out of her. And thank God we did. And both cases had, good results for families that were deserving.
Was Paul Newman's the verdict before or after that?
Oh, no, it's way after Paul Newman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's quite a courtroom moment.
The case started off with quite a courtroom moment. The best friend of the decedent was a man named Dennis Braska, who was a lieutenant commander, and he came in his Navy whites. Dennis Braska was the character Iceman that Val Kilmer played in Top Gun.
Wow.
And he was the first witness who told the story of the plaintiff and this incredible climb that he'd had to being one of the best pilots that they knew. And I mean, and it was dress whites.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, that case had all kinds of drama in it. And it's another case that I use my what's the body rhythm of a lawyer on.
How so?
I saw where he ran out of gas later on in the afternoon. I got this lady as a last witness of the day. I knew he was tired and headed for the barn.
Well, as we wind down, is there anything else that you would want to bring forward to our listeners?
Yeah. Those of us that do the work that we do as plaintiffs' lawyers, we have an enormous privilege and an awesome responsibility. We stand for those unable to stand. We walk for those unable to walk. We speak for those who can't speak, the disenfranchised, the powerless, to give them access to justice and hopefully justice itself.
Well, thank you very much for being here, Tom.
Thank you, Miles. Take care.
And thank you for listening today. Please email us at podcast@coopers.law with questions, comments, feedback, and suggestions for who we should have on the show. Like what you heard? Share this with a colleague and leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. To all of you doing justice out there, happy hunting.